Honored House, Bernal Heights Neighborhood Center, and a whole bunch of other folks starting to talk about developing a housing preservation strategy back in 2008 or so. In 2009, I took a little time off because I became a dad. And when I came back to work, lo and behold, we had legislation that created the first seed funding for the small sites program. For us as CCHO, as the Council of Community Housing Organizations, it is really about a program about stabilizing communities, about stopping displacement, about empowering tenants to really have agency over their own homes and the future that they can have here in the city. There's a lot of stories and a lot of folks who are involved in kind of the technical aspects of this, but really, I think uplifting the stories is what we wanted to do today. So with that, I will hand it over to Ida.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Fernando. We will get started with some of the thematic questions, but first, please send in your questions. We'll get to them later in the program as they come along. Just drop them in the chat box, and we'll have them snagged up so we can remember to ask them later. All right. So first of all, we will start with how acquisition projects come into being, and what are some of the various stories of stakeholders that come together to make it happen. And so we can start with Francesca at, let me get the acronym there, at the San Francisco Community Land Trust, that she could have some stories about people who approach, make some introductions about their buildings to try and save them.
Thanks, Ida and Fernando and Misha. I was looking over our portfolio and thinking about what I could bring today, and actually realized that the majority of the buildings we have involved tenant-like activism at the start. So it's really exciting to think about that. I've been reflecting on how important that has been. And I really wanted to tell the story today of a property that we're currently trying to acquire, but has been a long process of getting to this point. And that's a building that's at 285 Turk Street in the Tenderloin. It's a 40-unit building. It's almost all people of color who currently live there, primarily Mayan and Filipino, but also African-American, Vietnamese residents, many seniors and people on disability. And so I called Lorenzo from the Filipino Community Development Corporation today, and I was like, give me the story. I really want to know, because I've been trying to help fundraise. We've made the 9 million and we need about like 700,000 more. And he told me that actually this building was bought by Mosser, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with as a very evil, company and slumlord, in 2016, upon which time they raised the rents immediately throughout the building 25%. But then a few months later, the tenants received a notice that the rents were going to be raised 70% more again, because they had thought that their building was in rent control because that's how they had lived there for 20 and 30 years. But Mosser, because the guy was on the rent board, we think that's how he knew, it was actually not under rent control. There was a loophole where he was able to get out of it. So anyway, the tenants reached out to Lorenzo at the Filipino Community Development Corporation, and they started like really heavy organizing, and they did a really amazing job. They brought in a lot of community groups from the Tenderloin, like Hospitality House, AAPI Legal, SOMCAN, Faithful Fools, who all came together and launched a really good campaign, and they stopped the rent increases. And so it was a victory, but it was, quote, a lot of work, as it always is. And then from then on, they kept mobilizing. And then in 2019, Mosser was going to sell that building for 18 million. And they actually reached out to TNDC, who was going to purchase it for 14 million, who offered that. And Mosser said, no, I want the 18. But then the tenants organized and the community organizations helped them, that whenever some big developer was coming in to look at purchase it, they would be there protesting. And actually, that is also how another one of our buildings, I think, was able to be purchased, Pigeon Palace, where my father lives, where we protested whenever people came to look at it to purchase. We made a very visible presence, like it's not going to be easy to do what you want to do with this building. So that really deterred like Maser's potential purchasers. And then come COVID, all the property prices are going down. And it turns out that like it's going to go back on the market for cheaper. At this point, the tenants themselves asked Lorenzo to reach out to us, San Francisco Community Land Trust, because we had done a presentation for them the year before on what community controlled housing looks like and what, you know, potential of co-ops. And they were really interested in that. And when they heard it was going to be sold cheaper, they asked to reach out to us. So it's all, you know, it's all them. It's all their like coordination and like strategic thinking. And I just like, so I am now working on the end of like trying to fill this funding gap for this project, which we're so close. And I'll like put that out there to you guys too. And because I feel now the responsibility to like rise up to meet, you know, the tenants that really organize. So that's my story of like, you know, one really amazing example that's ongoing of tenants reaching out and like guiding the process.
And, you know, to also hear from like, you know, more of the nonprofit side, we can also hear from Reginald. Why don't you tell us, Reginald Hairston, you can introduce yourself a little bit, but why don't you tell us about, you know, also when tenants come to you and how a nonprofit takes that on and you know, moves to acquire that.
So hello everyone, Reggie is fine. It's so interesting, I have to be honest with you, my stories are not as exciting as Francesca's. I think I am somewhat new to the city in the process of acquiring the buildings as far as for housing preservation, not new to affordable housing. I've always done that work. And I was thinking Francesca's story was great. I can remember whenever I joined SFHDC and they said, okay, well, Reggie, your job, you're going to acquire buildings and preserve them. True story. I think I went around riding the neighborhood looking for sale signs. And it wasn't until later that our director of real estate said, well, hold on, there is a little bit of a process that we do want to key you in on. So I was like, oh, you mean I don't have to ride around the neighborhood? So this is kind of great. Yeah, that was. But Ida, thanks for the question and opportunity to share. I think one of my colleagues here are going to talk a little bit about how we come to the knowledge of a particular building that may be up for sale. So I won't necessarily talk about that, but I will speak just along the lines of what Francesca shared. We recently acquired our second small sites acquisition, and one of my support agencies, the colleague kind of told me, Reggie, one of the biggest pieces to this I want you to know is the tenant portion. And I said, tenant portion? Geez, I'm looking at performers and, you know, trying to be like Francesca and some others raising these millions of dollars. And he was like, honestly, the math is the least of your worries. And it wasn't until we got into this particular phase of this particular acquisition that I understood what he was saying. Real quick story is I'll never forget the first day I went. My Spanish is somewhat okay. We're engaging the residents, and a gentleman, an older gentleman, kept coming out of unit number 2. That's the only thing I'm going to tell you. He kept coming out of unit number 2, and every time we would say to the tenant, I would say, you know, Reginald, yo estoy aquí para ayudar ustedes. He would say, no, don't listen. And I told you my Spanish is good for sharing, but sometimes I don't key in and hear everything properly. So the colleague that was there had to literally address the gentleman and say, hey, wait a minute. We will talk to you at an appropriate time, sir, and things of that nature. So this was my first introduction. I thought that I was going to do all this fabulous work. I'm going to preserve this building, which I'll share with you. There are tenants there, seniors, almost kind of like what Francesca shared, a BIPOC group of individuals that live there, seniors, and had lived there for 20 years. And I'm thinking I'm doing this great work, but this one particular individual who not really understanding what I was thinking that I was there for, which is to help them, was very somewhat against it. And it wasn't until we spent time with that individual and other residents there that they began to buy in to the process of knowing that what the purpose of our purchasing the building and doing the extra effort of preserving housing for these individuals that had lived in the building for over 20 something years. And so that's just a little story of how I've learned, and I'm even learning even more, as some of you already know, that tenant piece, that tenant buy-in it's very important, very, very important.
Thank you, Reggie. And of course, an important aspect to all of this is the COPA notices. That's the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, which, you know, all of our panelists are familiar with. And so as you, if one of you guys want to take that on and introduce yourselves and your relation to that and how those notices, you know, play into how acquisitions come to be.
I can take that one. Thank you. This is Johnny Oliver with MEDA, Mission Economic Development Agency. We have been a part of the Small Sites Program from its onset 5-6 years ago with our first acquisition. And we've learned a lot along the way. And to Reggie's point, this is a tenant-driven process. In the first example, the tenants organized, the tenants were behind the momentum of the acquisition. When it's the other way around and you're knocking on somebody's door, you're no different than any other prospective person coming to look at a building. You represent the man, and you're coming to take my building, and you're coming to displace me. So it's a little more challenging. It's a lot more challenging when it's the other way around and we're approaching the residents and the tenants and explaining to them, this is what the Small Sites Preservation Program is, and this is how it works, and this is how it's going to affect you. This is COPA, and this is how we know about your site and why. For those of you that are not familiar with COPA, it's the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, which states that any site that is potentially going to be up for sale has to first be presented to a qualified nonprofit to give them an opportunity to, if possible, acquire the site before it hits the open market. Since COPA legislation got approved, thank you, Supervisor Fewer and everyone else that made that happen. The floodgates and the number of projects going across our desk is overwhelming. Unfortunately, residents and tenants right now are not made aware of this COPA notice currently under the current legislation. So the burden lies on the qualified nonprofits and our community to notify them and let them know that even in events where we're not going to be able to purchase the building, folks need to be ready and be prepared for what might be coming down the line. So since COPA, we have purchased 7 sites. We partnered with Reggie on his latest site, and it gives us an opportunity to let folks know your building is for sale and other buildings like yours. This is the outcome of what happened to that building. We don't want the same to happen to your building. Would you be interested in what we call a small sites acquisition? A small site acquisition, it's not just buying the building. It means taking the building off of the rent control market, converting that building into a San Francisco affordable housing project, and expecting every resident to abide by and follow the rules that everybody living in an affordable housing development has to on an annual basis, which is provide income documentation, follow and stick with all of the rules that everybody living under affordable housing has to follow. When you've already been living in your building for 20, 30 years, why, who, what are you talking about? No, to Reggie's point, don't listen to him. Yeah, so COPA has helped us to see more sites that would never have been shared on the open market. In many cases, projects are trading hands before anybody is even aware of it. For us, now that we've got a COPA notice, if we know that it's a site that is very likely going to have displacement, we notify somebody in that MEDA's geographic area is the Mission and the Latinos in surrounding neighborhoods. but we've been expanding and we're doing our best to help build capacity in other areas so that we can see the same level of preservation happen across the city. We've got a few sites that we've partnered with Reggie with SFHDC, and we're hoping to do the same on the west side as well, and across the city. But for us, from the onset, the first biggest question for us is, are the tenants on board? And what is the likelihood of all of them being on board? If we're not anywhere near 50%, unfortunately, most likely the scenario is going to be that these folks are not ready for, or are not wanting to move forward with what we call an SSP acquisition. And we unfortunately, no matter how great the numbers pencil out, have to walk away from those scenarios. It's always a much different experience when the tenants are already organized, they're already working with another tenant advocacy group and come to us, because we already know that we've got that tenant buy-in, and that's number one, is the tenant buy-in. I'll leave it
Clear
there.
theme that's
Thank you.
emerging, and that also segues great into our next topic area, which is, because I imagine with the COPA notices that maybe in areas where there's a little less nonprofits organizing in certain neighborhoods, people are just more aware of the acquisitions that could be made. So this is for all the panelists. How has the geography of acquisitions been expanded on, like the where those nonprofits are already based?
I can start things off here. Kati Vastola, I'm the Operations and Communications Manager at the Housing Accelerator Fund. And Johnny did set us up so well for this question. Just to sort of take a bird's eye view, I think one thing to keep in mind is just how much we have already succeeded collectively in expanding the small sites program to date. So I think to date, we're at something like 40 plus projects in neighborhoods throughout the city. That's 300 to 400 units and serving somewhere between 800 and 1,000 residents, we think. The Housing Accelerator Fund, since 2017, has been able to partner on about half of these projects. And in the last couple of years, with the support of all of the people here, many of the names I recognized in the participant list, we have succeeded already in expanding into new neighborhoods. So we've been able to preserve small sites in the Richmond, that site that Reggie was talking about, that MEDA and SFHDC work together on, is the furthest south site that the Housing Accelerator Fund has been involved in so far. It's in the Outer Mission. We've done sites in the Sunset and in Soma. So we have a lot to be proud of in round one that we've accomplished together. And I think we're all also really invested in how can we continue to get better as we get bigger. We're having a session at the Housing Preservation Lab later this month, really focused on how we want to scale and expand preservation collectively and support each other in that, to ensure more geographic equity and more capacity building as we move forward. So we've done a lot that I think we all are proud of, and we're all invested in expanding as well as we can going forward.
Yeah, what are some other strategies that the particular nonprofits like MEDA have for organizing in other neighborhoods? There's been some more wide expansion. Johnny, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we're definitely wanting to share the wealth of what our growing pains up to this point. Our strategy is to partner and to work alongside with someone that may have affordable housing background, but needs to understand how to fit this round peg in a square hole, however that goes. It's unlike other affordable housing projects that have a timeline of anywhere from 3 to 5 years. We're talking, we have to be in and out of escrow within 90 days. We have to be able to complete all inspections within 30 days. With COPA, we have to be able to notify the seller that we are interested within 5 days. So it's a hustle. And in many cases, we're managing 4 or 5 rehab that have already been acquired, while trying to maintain and keep up with all of the different COPA notices that are coming through. So MEDA can't do it all. MEDA is and will be focused on our geographic neighborhood and our constituents, which are Latino residents. So we got to have other folks get up to speed so that they can also roll up their sleeves and also do this important preservation work across the city. So partnership, that's my bench on that.
I'd like to also add, if I may, is that,
Of course.
hi, everyone. This is so interesting, of course. In my district, you know, when I first became supervisor, there wasn't a small site acquisition on the west side at all. And I think through the years, what I discovered as supervisor is that what Johnny said, it is so imperative to actually have this sort of expertise on the west side. It is because everything is done so quickly and that you have to get you get the COPA notice. You know, we were scouting out ourselves for sale signs on apartment buildings, and we would go to Mo, the mayor's office of housing, and saying, hey, here's a site for you, buy this. And they would say, so that's not how it works, you know, that there is an affordable housing provider that, you know, we work with, and then we didn't have one on the west side. And so I think it is really imperative to build this sort of expertise on the west side if we really want to expand it onto the west side, which is really needed. And I only just say that because the west side is pretty developed, and a lot of older homes and a lot of rent-controlled apartments that are just ripe actually for nonprofits to purchase or the city to purchase. I think, so I just want to also recognize that they are in the process now. You know, we asked for some state funding from Assemblymember Phil Ting, a starting grant to actually start this discussion about who might be this nonprofit affordable housing developer for the west side, and what might that look like, and would it be the Sunset and the Richmond, and also further through D7 and D11, because we didn't have representation there. And actually, when you see where the small sites money had gone, it really went to these areas where they have really developed expertise, such as the Mission, and also some sites, I think, but really concentrated in the Mission because MEDA was so good at it. And so I think that there's this opportunity on the west side to really expand, but it is imperative that there is a nonprofit developer there in the west side working closely with, you know, the Housing Rights Committee, all these nonprofits in our district that are actually working toward the same goal, because they actually are the ones also who have this expertise in working with the tenants to get the tenants organized, to actually tell the tenants about their rights. And so it is imperative, I think, that we grow something out in the west side for the west side, because as I said before, it's like once you get a property and you want to jump on it, like you have to be very quick. And so this is the sort of expertise that I think is lacking on the west side. In my district, we're able to actually have 3 small site acquisitions. Thank you to MEDA, thank you to CCDC, and thank you to San Francisco Community Land Trust, 3 well-established, I think, nonprofit, you know, affordable housing providers. And so this is the expertise I think that we will need to glean from in order to grow our own.
And that, of course, was Sandra Lee-Fewer, former supervisor, San Francisco supervisor representing the Richmond district. As a reminder, we also have Kati Vastola of the Housing Accelerator Fund, Francesca Manning of the San Francisco Community Land Trust, John Oliver from Mission Economic Development Agency, and Reggie Hairston from the San Francisco Housing Development Corporation. And on that same beat, you know, with the expanding into other geographic areas, there's also certain populations we want to make sure are staying in the city too. So what are some strategies specifically to reach like Black communities who are facing a loss of the population in the city and representation and are at risk of displacement?
I'd love to take that. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm Black. I wouldn't mind taking it. Thank you. You know, so yes. It's interesting. I think whenever, as you are presenting that question, I'd love to put a pause and go and see if I can read as many books as possible on strategies of reaching out to communities, but I can't do that. So, you know, it's interesting just in thinking about it. The first thing that comes to mind, I think about, you know, marketing, being present. I'm going to say something, nobody jump on me. The woman, the technology. Well, Reggie, what are you talking about? Marketing. In regards to what we're talking about regarding housing, I shared with you guys when I first joined the team, was thinking about this. I thought I was going to have to drive around the neighborhood. Well, after they calmed me down and told me I didn't have to do that, as Sandra even touched on just a little bit. Then after finding some, I realized, for better or for worse, more so for worse, that in the district that our office is in District 10, I'm really not finding a lot of potential acquisitions. I mean, I'm really turning over rocks. And so I began to think about, wow, how can I reach out specifically to this particular community and, many BIPOC individuals and a lot of individuals that look like me. And, I'm like, wow, what kind of marketing is out there? How do we get the word out? And so I didn't want to drive around in my pickup truck with the bullhorn. So I thought, well, I better find some other ways. And so I began to reach out to, what do I know? Churches in the neighborhood, community-based organizations. Hey, maybe Mrs. Jones, you live in a building and you've heard grumbling about the owner wants to sell, or maybe you've heard grumblings that the tenants are displeased with the services there, or something to that effect. I know often we go to, oh, wow, the landlord's not doing well, let's see if we can get him to sell. But sometimes it's just, hey, Mrs. Smith has had the building forever, her children have gone on and things of that nature. And maybe our organization, she'd be happy to know that our organization is poised to purchase the building and keep it affordable. So marketing, being present, being in the neighborhood. I just alluded to community-based organizations, reaching out to them. I said the woman. Now, some people would say, Rich, be very careful. In my culture, the many households are headed by females. And so that, believe it or not, is a way of conversing and getting the word out throughout the community. I'm just going to share it. And then even technology. What platforms are out there on a technological basis that we can share? I think I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't think San Francisco as a whole does a lot of billboards per se, but maybe you wouldn't want to put on a billboard SSP in your neighborhood or something to that effect. But just finding creative ways to get the word out, because Mrs. Smith has had this building and she would want nothing more than to do something for the members of that community that have served her and her family. And so I'm certain if she knew of such a program existed, she might really consider it. So it's just some of the things that one might think of when we come to strategizing and working with, the cohorts and other organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Reggie. And so, while nonprofits have focused on smaller buildings targeted by victors, are there new opportunities as landlords are, facing pressures due to COVID and the financial fallout from that? Francesca, maybe you want to go ahead.
Well, yeah, like as I said, there are like dropping costs of some very large or medium-sized buildings where opportunities are opening up, I think. But I feel like one of the other big things that's sort of coming down the pipeline is the SB 1079, which is trying to create a way to intervene in the foreclosure process to help people stay in the homes that they own that might be going into foreclosure, or help tenants stay in the homes that they are renting that are going into foreclosure. And I think that that's something that, like a lot of people thought a lot about the 2008 crisis. And if only we could have snatched up like all those things away from these awful banks and speculators who were buying people's homes for $100,000 when the person could have bought it themselves at that cost. So I think that's one of the exciting new kind of things that we should, fight really hard for right now in terms of a new way of getting larger properties as well as smaller properties.
Francesca, can I add to that? One of the questions that came up in the chat box I see is from Jennifer. It says, are developers starting to think about or feeling pressure around acquiring single family homes or rehabbing single family homes into duplexes? And to Reggie's point, many of the Black residents of San Francisco that have been here for a very long time are homeowners, and they're sites that are at risk of being lost. What happened in 2008 might very well be coming very soon, with the fact that many folks are not back to work yet. And a lot of these eviction moratoriums and forbearance plans that many banks are extending are going to be expiring very soon. Right now, the small site program, as it is today, it says 5 to 25 units. The smallest unit count that we've successfully got the city to make an exception on is 3 units. I don't know and don't see if they would be able to expand to 2 units. But I think we do need to get ahead of the curve. I think we do need to look at how many households, how many homeowners might be at risk if and when they're not able to keep up with their debt on some of these homes. We lost a lot of homeowners in the 2008 all across the mission. So I'm fearful that the next wave is coming soon too.
Yeah. If I could also add to that, I think that was one of the things on our agenda that we didn't get to, and it was always small sites 2.0. Looking at these smaller units, it was really frustrating. You know, in the Richmond, we have a lot of 4-unit buildings. We have 3-unit buildings. We have people who've been living there 44 years, 50 years, and yet we couldn't, because of the small sites, was basically there's a, you know, sweet spot of, I think, like 12 units or something. And, you know, they wouldn't look at anything that was three units, and yet in 4 units, and yet we were seeing so many of these buildings being sold. And so I think, and I would encourage this group to go to one of the legislators, and probably Ian Fregosi, quite frankly, because he is an expert at this. He knows exactly, he actually did it all in my office, COPA, everything. It was on our agenda to do small sites 2.0, to be able to capture these smaller homes and buildings, and not just these large apartment buildings, because we know displacements happen all across the board. Even, you know, these single family homes too, sometimes we're displacing 3 families from a home. It is no longer, I mean, very often it is many families. What we're hearing from the nonprofits, that they are tripling up now and sharing a household, a single family home. And so I think, you know, speculators have been looking at that, because rent control actually does not include single family homes. And so they are not rent controlled. So I think that this is a prime opportunity now. I just want to put a word in there to everybody, is that I think that small sites 2.0, it's about time. It is the right time to do it. As we said, we could be having another great opportunity to purchase some of these homes.
Could you quickly explain why it is that they are like, why they're not less than 5 units?
I wasn't there with the original legislation, but what I've been told from the Mayor's Office of Housing is that they want it to be economically feasible, and it's about economics. But anyone who was there before me, please, you know, I just got introduced to the affordable housing world and how to build it and save it a couple of years ago. So if anyone knows, I would love to know too.
Looking to our elders on this one that were there at the onset. Fernando or Peter, do you guys know why where that cutoff was made and why?
Exactly what Sandy said. Yeah, it was about the economics at that point, and at that point, you know, the second wave of evictions had not started yet. And so what people were looking at in 2008, 2009, when that legislation was first created, was the speculation that came out of the financial crisis. So landlords who, you know, the story that people hear is about all the single family homeowners who lost their homes. But a lot of the financial crisis was driven by speculation on larger apartment buildings. And a lot of those were turning over as these speculators had over leveraged and couldn't pay back their loans. So I think that was the idea. And then by the time 2014, 2015 came around, even 2013, we started to see that big rise in Ellis Acts and owner move-in evictions targeted exactly at those 3-unit buildings, 4-unit buildings, and 2-unit buildings.
I would add too, this is Peter Cohen, Fernando's colleague at Choo. Sorry for my gravelly voice, but just one other aspect of, I think San Francisco's always been a little bit unique in that most of our affordable housing programs and our sort of political narrative has been around multi-unit buildings, because we have such a large renter population and it's such a dense city, that has been kind of the programmatic and political focus. You go to other cities, even in the Bay Area and certainly in Southern California, and there's a lot more focus on single family homes, both the risk of displacement, but also programmatically on single family homes as an affordable housing kind of opportunity. And I think in that sense, San Francisco has been sort of different than a lot of the rest of the major cities of the state. And in some respects, that kind of left the 2008 crisis of single family home ownership loss kind of without tools. And so, I think it's a good point about not letting that happen again. And it's frankly a little bit artificial to think that single family housing is per se any different than multifamily housing. It's just sort of a programmatic choice. And perhaps it's time to sort of bring all that together and look at them as a whole spectrum of housing assets, but also risks of losing those assets. Sorry again for my voice.
So with the, obviously those lessons are unfortunately not that far away from the speculation and the displacement that came out of that. And, this is for everybody, how are like nonprofits or other organizers in the space, mobilizing to get ahead of those speculation trends. As Johnny was mentioning, we've got this eviction cliff that's coming. For those of you who aren't aware, there's an eviction moratorium across the state that is ending at the end of June. Doesn't look like there's a whole lot of traction to get that extended as of right now. So there's this eviction cliff that's coming, and they've been picking up. So how have you guys been working to get ahead of that this time, especially with those lessons not that far behind us? Maybe Francesca or Katie, you want to hop in there?
Well, I'm thinking about two things. So one is that I'm thinking about kind of that making connections, talking to people that Reggie was talking about, which, like we do have houses that were more top down, where residents didn't invite us in. And I go to those properties sometimes trying to be like, hey, like, what do you need? Do you want to know anything? And they're like, you're my landlord. Like, I don't want to talk to you, like, what are you doing here? And so getting ahead of these trends is about like talking, like, more engagement, making sure that every community group in San Francisco knows that all of these organizations, all of us here exist, so they can reach out to us if they need to. It's about like getting COPA to do what the Berkeley TOPA does, where they notify the residents as well as us, so then they're not suspicious of us when we come and say, hey, your building's getting sold. They're like, why do you know? So I'm thinking of these kinds of things, but I also feel like there's a need for us to hold the larger context in mind, because as amazing as these organizations are, and like as Kati was talking about what we've achieved, like it's such a drop in the bucket in terms of displacement, especially of like San Francisco's Black residents, and now other people as well, like whatever, we all know the stories. And like, I feel like the federal side really wants to just focus on rent relief, which, as we know, is just really like a funnel of money to landlords. But there's a moment to push something more big and holistic. And for us as like community housing developers and land trusts to be in solidarity with movements for a larger kind of public and social housing and public housing funding, I think is really important, because it's like, we aren't going to be able to do it, just us. So we need to fight, and part of what we do that's amazing is that we do talk to the residents and we are engaged. So that's a place where we can create more people thinking and fighting for this. But yeah, I feel like that connection needs to kind of get made.
And if I can tag in, you know, I'm kind of one of those think outside of the box, sort of. And so kind of along the lines of what Francesca is saying, I think about the mission of many of our organizations, you know, SFHDC, foster financial stability through the development of affordable housing, the facilitation of home ownership and the economic empowerment and revitalization of blah, 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 you know, goes on to say. And I'm just thinking, to Francesca's point, is if I can kind of get the information out, even on a smaller scale, if I can get Mr. Johnson to thinking about home ownership of buying a single dwelling home, at some point, Mr. Johnson is going to say, well, wait a minute, I could buy a 3-unit building, a 4-unit building, or whatever. And so, or he's now knowledgeable, the community is now knowledgeable of, hey, well, if they have these home ownership programs for me and my neighborhood, I wonder, is such a thing on a bigger, broader scale? So just a small thinking of, I was trying to find the analogy, what does one say? A little bit of dough through the thing, sifts through, whatever. In other words, I'm just trying to say, I like to drop a little bit in the community and then let it spread. I don't want to use that other analogy of what's going on. We don't have much rain, so I'm not going to say that, but drop it and let the information spread to help us, so to speak.
Thank you for that, both Reggie and Francesca. Go ahead, Sandra.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I think it's really important to have a really good relationship with an organization like the Housing Rights Committee. So we hear, they're our ear to the ground. You know, I used to meet with them once a week and it was like, what are you hearing about tenants? And what is, because once we publicize, and they do a lot of tabling, they go out to a lot of events and a lot of people know about them. What we're finding is that when people hear that their building might be for sale, or they're hearing some grumblings, or the landlord starts to really fix up their building, they're a little suspicious, and then they're hearing that they're just freaked out. Like people are just freaked out. They don't know where to turn. They don't know what to do. And so I think with the Housing Rights Committee, they've really sort of built a trust in our neighborhood with tenants. They're a very trusted organization. So that is the first place they go. And I think that, you know, when we talk about our tenants, a lot of it is they have, you know, when you're talking about their housing, they're all flipped out about it. And so if we could ever just, I feel like in the Richmond, like we should be organizing sort of a group of people who have saved their places through small sites acquisitions, and that it's proven that you can do it. And this is what it takes. And so it's almost like tenants teaching other tenants sort of how to do it. And so to get the word out through this organization, because I think a lot of them seniors, these are people who are extremely vulnerable. I had, you know, was able to save, and I only have 3 SROs in my neighborhood. I was able to save 1 SRO, but it was like 14 Chinese seniors. One woman was 98 years old, all monolingual, Chinese speaking. This is, you know, how do we get the word out to these people? I feel like we need to really depend on our nonprofits to do it, but then also to build this trust that we're gonna work with you. And there is a lot of mistrust and distrust within, I think, our communities of color around the bureaucracy of City Hall and organizations. And so they've been exploited repeatedly. I think they have felt like no one is going to really take care of us, and that big money always wins. And this is the wonderful thing about these small site acquisitions, is that big money doesn't win this time. People win. And that's one of the wonderful things I think about the small sites program.
I mean, on that note, what are some other ways that you guys are finding is a good way to be proactive in hitting on some of those sentiments, and particularly for communities of color too, like Sandra was saying with the monolingual elders, you know, how are there some like, in what ways can nonprofits and organizers like be specific about reaching to those kinds of groups, because they're probably going to be more likely to be not as outreach to or aware of this COPA process and acquisitions.
This is Johnny with MEDA. That is challenging right now. There is more COPA notices than there are feet on the ground that can go out and notify folks. To Francesca's point, if we can get some changes to our COPA legislation to allow for tenants notices as well. That takes a huge burden off of the qualified nonprofit. One of the questions came up about how does a nonprofit in this field get these notices? It's an application process through the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. You would need to apply with them to register as a qualified nonprofit to receive these notices. So it takes an organization like HRC that is dedicated to that to be able to take the time to explain and to gain the trust of those folks. And there are some challenges right now across the city in the tenant advocacy area for what I feel is the next wave coming. So I hope that we can figure this out sooner than later.
On that note, there's a lot of tenants and homeowners are, thinking about other things, more immediate financial concerns. So how are residents, sorry, for the ones who are in acquired buildings too, like how are they being supported through COVID and job loss, and how does that also tie into, meeting people who need that outreach where they're at as well? And, what are some common questions or concerns that they might have that you guys are seeing?
For MEDA, folks that have been challenged because of COVID, it's connecting them to our other services and our other departments. And if it's not in-house with MEDA, it's a connection to another organization. I'll let others speak to what their other connection to outreach looks like for you guys.
I think if I may tag in, just like Johnny said, that's exactly what SFHDC does. When we were successful in acquiring this most recent acquisition, immediately we connected some of the individuals who reside at the building with our services, because the very thing that you just brought up, Ms. Ida, from income loss to needing a job and things of that nature. So we were able to connect them with our services. So same as John.
All right, thank you. Did any other panelists want to chime in?
Well, I just wanted to also mention that it's also in the chat that in November 2020, we had an amendment to COPA that actually says that, MOHCD has to provide an information sheet about COPA, and that seller has to actually provide this to each tenant. So I'm not sure if they've done that yet. This would be a good thing to follow up on, actually, since we're in this discussion.
Thank you. And now we can kind of move on to the funding aspect of this, because there are a lot of funds that are being thrown around right now. And then also in the past year, or proposed, I should say, for right now. And then of course there's the federal stimulus too. But in the past year, we saw the emergence of Project Home Key and other federal stimulus, like I mentioned, Project Room Key. Those have been, pretty immediate resources to work with. And then of course, Governor Gavin Newsom proposed, expanding on that with the latest budget. California has a massive $75 billion surplus that they're expecting. So there's some resources to work with here. How much potential do those resources and that program in particular have in providing new opportunities for funding these acquisition and preservation projects?
I think I can comment a little bit about that. So I was the budget chair for the Board of Supervisors for 2 years, and it was a sort of a really crazy time, but I was on the budget committee for 3 years. I think one of the big barriers to the small site acquisition program is really the funding, and it's a dedicated funding to this program. It is always a fight. They try to take the money all the time. I think that when we looked at Project Home Key, they actually wanted to take some of our small sites money. Also, they're always trying to rate it, it seems like, because, they're thinking bigger. They're not thinking like, 7 units, they're thinking hundreds of units. And I actually think the Project Home Key is those funds are actually really perfect to purchase some of these motels, hotels that are going out of business because of COVID. And, you know, they're kind of like B hotels, and we've got a lot of them in San Francisco, to purchase these, you know, at this price point, because I don't think we're ever going to see this again. And so I think that is excellent. But I do also think that there should be some money set aside for this small sites program. And, you know, it was a big fight at City Hall to get this money. So in 2019, there we had some ERAF money, and it's the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund. So we had all this money coming in. It was like $415 million total, but out of the general fund, it was $180 million. And I wanted to set aside a portion of this for small sites. And it was a huge fight. It was a lot of tears, it was a lot of screaming. In fact, I hung the phone up on the mayor's chief of staff. It was so frustrating. It was fighting. And also, I think getting other board members to actually protect this money too, because I was looking at my district and saying, if I want to be able to purchase more sites, I'm going to need the money. And I think the mayor's office of housing actually needed to be pushed to put money aside. So what we did is that, you know, we get this ERAF fund every year, and it sort of fluctuates about the money. And so we wrote a resolution that passed, and it's not binding, of course, but it is a resolution that does say that the ERAF monies that would come in, and sometimes it's like 90 million, sometimes, as I said before, it's $180 million, but this ERAF money would come in, that half of that ERAF money would be put aside, and half of that pot would go to production, and the other half to preservation and protection. And so we wrote, it was passed unanimously by the board. And although it's not binding, it was legislation that was passed. So it was sort of a guide to say, and put sort of a stake in the ground to say, these ERAF monies that come in every year, it is not up to the discretion of the mayor's office on how you will spend this. 50% of that money must go toward either the production of affordable housing, 50% of that, and then 50% for preservation and protection. I think that setting aside a designated amount every year to grow this pot, as we discussed today, that there's going to be many, many more opportunities. And so funding is crucial and dedicated funding is crucial. I think everyone probably on this panel will agree with me that sometimes the mayor's office of housing sort of doesn't see the distribution of these funds in the same way. And so it is always a fight. And this is, and I am hoping that there is somebody on the Board of Supervisors that's willing to fight them, because especially your budget chair, and really to fight them for this money. It's, you know, anytime there's $40 million on the table that you have for small sites money, they're looking, there's so much need in the city, we get it. But I think that if we want this program to really grow and to be viable and to save people who are already in their homes, and that we can do this through the small sites acquisition program, then we need to set aside funds dedicated for that. It'd be wonderful if they could set aside a large amount of money with this influx of money that's coming in. I spoke to Budget Chairman Haney, who said, hey, the budget isn't as bad as we thought because we got all this stimulus. When I'm like, yeah, okay, that's great. So now it's up to all of you and also the Board of Supervisors to really fight for this money to be set aside for the small sites program. And then, of course, the revision of Small Sites 2.0, but funding is crucial. Without that, I think we can all agree that this program would be dead in the water if we didn't set aside funds for that, for the program.
Thank you for that insight into City Hall workings. I don't know if everyone has that. Katie, I think you were about to jump in as well.
I was just going to quickly comment, just to speak a little bit about Project Home Key so far. So, of course, San Francisco, and Ida, you've covered this. So thank you for writing about Home Key so far. But it doesn't address all of the issues that we've raised here, but we were able to channel almost actually a little bit over $70 million from the first round of Project Home Key into San Francisco to acquire 2 properties. And one of those, the Granada, was an SRO, and there were 70 people who are already living there, a little bit over 70 people already living there. So we were able to preserve those units alongside adding the 140 plus units of PSH. So there are, and we're expecting even more with this huge proposed expansion of Home Key, more opportunities to create PSH alongside more opportunities for preservation. So I think that's exciting.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Francesca.
I guess I wanted to throw in there that when we talk about funding for preservation, I feel like it's often separate from the conversation about what kinds of homes do we want? What kinds of lives are we looking to enable in these spaces? So right now, you know, the small sites program is not conducive to co-ops, and it's not particularly conducive to extremely low income residents. And those, I think that a lot of small sites, current inhabitants are people who are on the one hand interested in co-ops, like having control over their housing and perpetuity and being able to, you know, give it to their children, et cetera, as well as people who are very low income and who for the most part can't afford the homes that MoCD assists us to purchase. So that's why for the Turk Street property I mentioned at the beginning, we're trying to raise funds outside of MoCD so that we can help them eventually turn into co-ops and lower the rent across the board for everybody in the building. So yeah, I feel like when we are thinking about allocating the money that we desperately need, and you said it so well, that, you know, this is the time where we need to be just like really put our foot down about like dedicated funding for these things. We also need to think about like what kind of you know, restrictions are being put on that funding, and like what do we want to see, how do we want that to be spent, and what kind of lives do we want to enable in this city? Because I grew up here, and like the city that I grew up in was made amazing because people could live for $500 a month or less. And they were able to do political organizing, and they were able to make amazing things. And so for me, that's part of my interest in all of these housing projects. Not that people are always, like, they shouldn't have to spend 30% of their income on rent if they're making $900 a month in SSI. You know what I mean? So I guess that's kind of like the thing that needs to go. I would love to have in concert with the funding question, which, you know, as we SFCLT, we need funding, obviously.
That actually, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that, you know, you're right. And I agree with Francesca, because I think that there are different models with the small site. And as the San Francisco Community Land Trust was a partner with our first acquisition. And I just think this involvement of their own self-management and control, it's very empowering for them. And I just want to give a little example of what the small, if people are wondering, like, what does this impact as people who live in these small sites buildings, you know, when I was running for supervisor in 2016, my campaign manager would give me a list of people who said, look, these people want to call back from you. And so I called this woman, and the woman was furious. She was so upset. She said, look, my building's being sold. I've raised my children here. You know, where can I go if I'm being evicted? I'm not going to be able to live here, and I'm going to have to move to another state. And I've raised my children, and you know, I've been living here 40 something years. And then I was able to direct them to the Housing Rights Committee, who worked with the San Francisco Community Land Trust actually, and so we acquired that building. And I just want to say that I recently just saw that woman, and the gratitude she has about keeping her place and being able to be near her children and her grandchildren, and that this is the only community. She goes, this is the only community I've known. I've lived here for so long. This impact, I don't think that I'm just going to say that I don't think MOHCD actually hears enough of these stories about how important this is that these people who have dedicated their lives actually to helping San Francisco be the vibrant place. And then another thing about the economic diversity. If we don't have economic diversity in San Francisco, we lose our diversity, quite frankly. And this is something, you know, I think that we've all, you know, everyone says, oh, it's so great in San Francisco, we're so diverse, you know, we're so, I mean, I'm thinking like, really? Because we are losing that diversity quickly. It is not just about race, and it's not just about, you know, it is really about diversity of thought. And if you don't have economic diversity, you just don't have diversity of thought in San Francisco. And so this is why I think it is so important that these people who are lower income folks, who maybe retired 30 years ago, who say to me, you know, Sandra, I know that if your rent is raised, you know, $25 for you, it might not be a lot of money, but I retired 35 years ago, and $25 more a month means that I'm not eating a couple of meals. And I don't think that people understand that enough. It isn't actually until I became a supervisor and sat in the homes of these people and spoke to them that I realized that how much every dollar means to them and their existence here. But for someone who has been like a resident of San Francisco for 50 years, who's dedicated their lives to being a member of our society here and growing my neighborhood in the Richmond, I just think that it is time that, you know, we look back and we actually give them some relief. And Francesca's absolutely right, is that I think we should be looking at models that actually help to relieve people from the huge rent burden that they have, as, you know, their retirements are not meeting the new income needs in this, you know, city that is so ridiculously expensive. And it's funny, I just tell you that one thing is that, you know, people say to me when I was on the board of supervisors, like, oh yeah, I can't wait till, you know, we can get back to where we were. And I'm just like, really? Because we were in such a great place to begin with. I'm looking at, this is the reset that we needed. And how we're going to use this reset to build back better is really up to everybody. And I think mainly our electeds also, but everyone else who has influence, I think this is the time. And I can't emphasize it enough, just because I think that we have not seen this time and from a very long time. And now we need to take advantage of it. And before, the speculators took advantage of it, and now it's our turn to take advantage of it.
Thank you for driving that human element parts, you know, so hard. Like, that is why you guys are all in this. That's why I'm writing about these programs and, you know, trying to remember that it's for the people. So thank you for bringing that like personal touch to it, because that's something that everyone needs to hear all the time, really. And now to go to a less human aspect, back to the funding really quick, as one thought that I had in hearing Francesca talk about the funding and like how this funding will be used. You know, I remember that there was a recent like study on a Bryant Street project that's for building affordable housing. However, one thing that the Housing Accelerator Fund had told me was that, you know, having that flexibility and that, you know, being able to use it quickly made a really big difference in getting the funding allocated. So maybe Katie, you want to talk about how, like, with these all influx of funds and proposals that are coming in, like, you know, how you know, that is actually allocated, and that for nonprofits and such are actually able to use that matters in actually acquiring these properties and being able to keep people in their homes in a really quick manner as things are rapidly changing.
Yeah, so we at the Housing Accelerator Fund right now are in conversations. I think going back to one of the earlier questions about what are our strategies right now. So we're in conversations with all of our partners to identify what are the different opportunities at all different scales for projects that we could potentially invest in. And then I think we are identifying all of the financial resources that we have and trying to build those up so that we can move as quickly as we can. So some of the exciting things that we've done, we launched a new fundraising vehicle with the San Francisco Foundation towards the end of last year called the Home for Good Fund, which increases the amount of just very fast, flexible capital. It's through loans from from people's donor advised funds, but we're trying to maximize the amount of money that we have. So as soon as opportunities come up, we can make loans, we can get those projects. We were able to use that Home for Good fund, for example, to support the home key acquisitions, which closed in 60 days. It was incredibly fast, and it's sort of unimaginable that we were able to move that quickly. It was hard, but we were able to do it. So that's what we're getting ready to do again.
Yeah, it seems like the speed that really came with Project Home Key made a big difference in the process that was required of you guys to make happen. And on another funding level is, of course, there's all these rent relief funds too that plays a role in preservation and stability as well. But then, how are you guys thinking about how to move that into like investment for like the longer term, not just to have these tenants have the back rent. And then there's of course the Housing Stability Fund that came out of Proposition I in San Francisco last November. So, and those funds just keep on exceeding expectations as well too. So there's just even more to work with. It is kind of amazing how we went from last year to like all these deficits, cuts expected across the board, to just kind of flush with cash in a lot of ways.
Sorry, was that a question back to me?
Yeah, if you want to talk about how moving these kinds of funds about stabilization for these tenants who have had like a unstable year, and moving that into investment, if potentially the Housing Stability Fund could play a role.
I will turn that over. I don't know if Peter wants to take that a little bit.
I'm happy to take on that. So Prop I it's fantastic that we now have funding coming in through taxation, through it's not a dedicated fund, meaning unlike other funds that are specific to a specific use, but we have Proposition I as a funding source that is estimated to bring in about 150 million, perhaps more. I think the numbers were going up in the last estimates. And we have a Housing Stability Fund that money is going to go into. It will go through the budget process, but to be used for social housing, affordable housing, preservation. And so over the next months, those priorities will be developed for that. And I think, as Sandy was saying, it's been a question of leadership, either from the board or from the mayor's office, in this case from the board, to dedicate those funds and to really say this is a use that is extremely important. And I think Sandy touched on it a little bit. There are different priorities around affordable housing. There are priorities around producing new units. And these priorities are really about making sure that the tenants that we have in San Francisco are not evicted, are not displaced in those communities, can afford to stay. And those are different, related, but different goals. And I think it's important for our electeds to understand those different goals. And I think that's where we've seen small sites and other preservation projects. Folks mentioned the whole SIP hotel discussion really rise up. How do we keep people in our city? And that takes money, and that takes taxes. So yay, Prop I. And I think it means going forward that we might be needing to look at other sources as well until we have a real long-term pool. I'll stop there.
All right, and we'll kind of move more into the reflective segment. We'll direct this over to Sandra, since she played a role in the COPA legislation. And for you, like how in getting that to where we are now, like what did it take to get where we are with the preservation work and with the acquisitions? And how also I'm personally curious, like how did the last round of the speculation stuff that we touched on, play into getting us to where we are now?
Yeah, I think that, it's very challenging, as I mentioned, about the funding. I think that when we looked at housing, and I just want to say, we were kind of looking at our district. We were looking at our district and saying, man, how can we stop the displacement in my district? The largest growing population in my district were seniors. And so we just said, oh my goodness, like, what are we going to do? What can we do? We started to look at land, like and places that we could build, because the city was so big on production. But then we realized, like, really, on the west side, it's going to be the small sites, because we don't have these large pieces of land and big parking lots that aren't being used and all that kind of stuff. So we had to, I think, create legislation that would actually allow us to build. And so Prop E does some of that. It says that it makes that we pass, the voters pass, and thank you again, Ian Fregosi, for spearheading that, is that every piece of land that it's over, 8,000 square feet can actually be affordable housing. It's already zoned for affordable housing. And so you don't have to go through that loophole. And I just think that the funding is so crucial to this, but it is also the mindset of the people in charge, meaning the mayor's office of housing. It's, do you believe in it or not? We've had many, many arguments. I think the San Francisco Community Land Trust can attest to this, that we have been frustrated ourselves with the mayor's office of housing because of the relationship with the San Francisco Community Land Trust too. Like, we love them. We like them to be on the west side. Mayor's office of housing saying, it's gonna mess you when you have people have control over their own building. And I just think there's this, so part of it is, I think that we have to get, add more, as we're learning about the housing, affordable housing, or the preservation and the protection, that we need to actually redo some of this legislation that was really difficult to pass in the first place. COPA, I can't tell you, like, Ian Fregosi, so many renditions of COPA. Oh my, so many meetings. I think all of you who participated, it was, oh, we're tweaking, we're trying to make it stronger. City attorneys saying, no, you can't do that. And they're also not that bold, there's always, and they don't want to be sued. And so it is back and forth, wordsmithing, going back to the community, always checking back in with the community that we're working with. How does this work for you? What do you guys think about this? And I think that why COPA, I think, works so well is that it wasn't just something that our office did and we said, okay, then we're going to write this, but it was so collaborative. And the process is more difficult. The process takes many more meetings, but the outcome is so much better. And I always say this about democracy and being on the board of supervisors, that you fight about stuff and it's like a nuance and they push it back, everyone's pushing back and on each other, blah, blah, blah. And that is what democracy is, but actually the product is so much better. And so I think with COPA, it was a struggle. I'm happy to say that they're looking at actually bringing COPA statewide, which I think would be excellent for the state of California. But I just think that politically, that money, I'll also just say that what sort of got us really going to was, I had a meeting with the owner of Veritas, and it was when we were trying to pass the operating and maintenance legislation that they couldn't do it anymore, And so I met with them and he said to me, oh, supervisor, in 2003 or something, I just had one apartment building, 4-unit place or something like that in the Mission. And now I have 250 apartment buildings, and I'm, buying over in Richmond and buying in Oakland. And I just thought, oh my God, like, we're going to have to buy some of these before they buy them, because it sort of freaked me out that he was able to do it so quickly. I mean, who was able to, in that short period of time, buy 250 apartment buildings? And I just think it was sort of freaked us out that they were able to do it so quickly, but they have all these investors, right? And so I just want to say also about, the San Francisco Housing Accelerator Fund. the nimbleness is so important, to be able to be so nimble that you're able to get these funds quickly and able to acquire them, because the city works so slowly. And so we're looking at how to solve all these different problems. I will say that it is extremely challenging when you're trying to explain how this one building with 7 units is so important to be saved. When they're looking at money, they love the match from private developers. They love the, build 250 units and then you build like, some ridiculous percentage of affordable housing on another site somewhere. Like they love all that type of stuff. But what we love is to see people not being displaced, that actually the government works for them, and that government works for the people that are most vulnerable, and that people who have been paying taxes into our city for all these years, that some of this money should go back to help them. These residents of San Francisco who have been the fabric, of not only my neighborhood, but all the neighborhoods of San Francisco. I just think that the convincing of legislators and actually people in charge, it's difficult. Especially when you hear in the background of a lot of groups, or one big group that is saying, build big, build everywhere, build big, knock down that building and just build it. Okay, knock down that, oh, you have a 4-unit building. Oh yeah, knock it down and make it like 10 units and then everyone gets displaced, and then so they're hearing all of this, and these people are really loud saying, just build big, just build big. It's okay. It's going to bring prices down, which is so ridiculous. And then you're hearing from people like us who are saying, no, these people are going to be displaced. I have a 98-year-old senior that will have nowhere to go. Like how it sort of goes back to what your moral compass is and what you believe in and whom we're trying to help. And to keep them here in San Francisco. So I hope I answered your question. I'm so sorry. I probably went way off, but I do think that, speculation is very real in San Francisco. And even though we're having a lull now, I am 64 years old and I've lived here all my life, and full disclosure, I am a property owner and I am a landlord. And I think that, it isn't the same San Francisco that I was raised in, and that, my mother and father were able to buy a house here and we were able to buy a home here. This lack of opportunity here for people to set down roots here and feel secure here. And it just goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs also, is that people need to know, about your basic needs are being met before you can actually live a viable life, and for your families too. And so this is why this small sites program and this preservation is so important. I get the production part of it, but as you see, there are a lot of other funding streams for production actually. But I will say that I do believe that any land that is publicly owned should be 100% affordable housing, because the land is so expensive. We did that at 1950 Mission, where when I was sitting on the Board of Supervisors, they wanted to build luxury condos on that publicly owned site by the school district. And I think Fernando, that's where we first met. And we just said, hell no, public land should do public good and should be for public good. And so now I think that's going to slate it to be 150 units of permanently affordable family housing. I think this is what we can do. I think we can duplicate it. I don't believe that any public land that we own should be market rate. I just think it should be 100% affordable.
And moving forward, what do you think is needed to expand on the foundation of this acquisition and preservation work in relation to COPA? You touched on COPA 2.0, but beyond that as well, what is needed to expand on this work?
Yeah, I think that we need to really push for MOHCD to actually be a real active partner in this. I think that it would be refreshing to have someone who's the head of MOHCD that actually really believes in this program. They can push it forward. I think there are ways to look outside the box actually about what we've been doing and be more creative. I mean, I actually think the small sites program is excellent. Of course, I guess it needs a new revision of it. But what else can we do? I served only 4 years. I am hoping that I think that actually, if I stayed another 4, Ian Fregosi would have thought of something new. I'm looking to some of these, other brains to kind of think of how we can think outside the box. Like if speculators and realtors and all these people, they're always thinking outside the box. They're always thinking like, what's our next thing? Like, what are loopholes that we can close? Like, what can we actually grow? I think that San Francisco is very fortunate because we have so many great minds that are working towards sort of the same goal. And we're caring about those same people, and we're caring about the same sort of culture of San Francisco that we're trying to preserve, and that San Francisco has been such a place of opportunity for so many people. And I've also always said that, it is a wonderful gift for myself to be able to live here and raise my family here. And I just think I want that gift for everyone. I think this is a wonderful place to raise children. I think it is a wonderful place to live. And I just hope that we can share it with everyone. We are, I think during the last couple of years, we're losing so many of our families of color. And what does that mean for the self-proclaimed most progressive city in the United States? It means that we're just kind of full of shit if we're not willing to really do something that is going to save them and keep them here and value them actually too.
It's quite the quote. Now onto just a couple questions with our remaining time. That I wanted to get to. One person asked about cooperatives being another model, and that's probably something Francesca can speak to. And they specifically asked too, why doesn't MOCD support new cooperatives too? And I don't know if Francesca have some insight into particularly MOCD, but if you could talk a little bit about cooperatives.
So San Francisco Community Land Trust, like our goal is to help like low-income people and middle-income people theoretically get to own their own cooperative housing. And when I first came into the SFCLT a couple years ago, I was told MOCD hates cooperatives. I'm like, what? And then this was repeated to me basically every week since then, and it's appeared, So I've been trying to figure it out, and I think it's just either some kind of institutional kind of like things that happen where, a government like body tilts in a certain direction, and then even though the people change like that, it's hard to kind of tilt it in the other way. This is my impression, which is really strange because there's a lot of places in the country where the co-op movement has been super successful, DC, New York, etc. But I think that, okay, so this is just to tie a little bit back to what Sandra was saying. I'm sorry, I'll try to be quick. Is that when we talk about speculation, like sometimes I feel like the thing that goes inside of the speculation in housing is that there are people who are rich enough to pay these high rents in this city and who will move to this city, right? And so there's the problem kind of, I think, with one of the problems in most CD is that they are still kind of like have a faith that with like a little bit of adjustment, we can still have the market work it out correctly with like a little bit of help here and there. But actually with the current situation, those people who are making so much money are gonna pull the rent up no matter what. And if we want to make a real, like, really affect that in a big way, we need constant, as Sandra was saying, constant streams of funding, to support low-income residents. And that needs to be not just a program, not just one big injection of money, not just one big loan, but like a constant support. And so, yeah, I guess I just wanted to add that on, and there's a way that co-ops could function with that. But I think that mostly, for example, because co-ops need support. Co-ops need external support. A lot of the time there needs to be training, there needs to be, financing available, there needs to be ongoing education within the co-op. And most CD says, oh, the co-ops didn't work because, like we've seen a few ones go real bad. Well, you didn't support those co-ops. You didn't help fund what they needed to really thrive in this city. So yeah, a few things to throw out there.
Another question that came up really quickly with our last minute, and this might be for Sandra too, is how could a public bank help with housing preservation? I know that's a concept that San Francisco has been working on.
Sure.
Sorry, really quick though. But.
Yeah, quickly, John Avalos introduced the idea of public bank. My office with Chelsea Bullard really took it for a couple of next steps. Actually, we thought we were very close to perhaps having a business plan. We, statewide, we can have a public bank. Oh yeah, a public bank can fund all of this stuff. I just think when you think about our budget of $13 billion and Bank of America being our bank, it just I could just pull my hair out. I just think that, we could be investing back into this. We could be funding our own stuff. I just think a public bank, I think it takes money to start it, and every time we talk about money, people are like, whoa. But actually, I think this idea of us owning our own money, this idea of us managing our own money, this money that has been earned off the, hardworking backs of San Franciscans, they should have some say. It should come back to us. We should be able to manage our own money. Yes, absolutely. I think that a public bank could actually help fund affordable housing, fund a lot of this stuff. It could fund many, many things. But really, the main thing is, instead of investing in things like private prisons and firearms manufacturing and, Keystone Pipeline and all this ridiculous stuff, we could be investing back into our communities. And that I think is the best thing about having a public bank.
All right, I'll leave it there. Maybe a panel for another time. Thank you guys all so much for your time and your thoughts and insight into preservation. And till next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
This was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Ida. Thank you to all the panelists. I just want to end by saying we've got one last Affordable Housing Week event coming up tomorrow at noon, Housing Our Workers. It'll be a conversation between housing experts and labor, including Kim Tabaglione, who's the director of the San Francisco Labor Council, and a few other people from the labor world talking about housing our workers. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thanks to Choo Choo.
Thank you. Good night.